Happy spooky season! This is Short Skirts and Sarcasm, and I'm Caroline, and this is my September wrap-up. Is October almost over? Yes. Apologies. However, I got a really gross cold in the beginning of October, and I looked and sounded absolutely terrible. You can still hear my voice is a little bit scratchy, but for the most part, I am all better, so I can actually start filming now. So yes, this wrap up is a little bit belated, but worth the wait, I think, because I read some pretty solid books. So as usual, I will go through these in alphabetical order by title. Starting with As Good as Dead by Holly Jackson. This is the third and final book in the A Good Girl's Guide to Murder series, and this one is quite a bit larger than the other two, and this was intense. I mean, the other two were also intense because they were about murder, but in this one, Pippa, the main character, gets stalked and kidnapped, which is an escalation from the first two books. So, I mean, I think it did it pretty well. I thought like the start was a little bit slow. It took me a while to get into it, but then once the action actually started, it was a wild ride. And like with the other two, I read this in like 2 or 3 days. It did not take me long, even though it's pretty big. But the writing is just really flowy and easy to, you know, get into, and very page turny. So yeah, in this one, like I said, Pippa gets stalked, and she of course takes her concerns to the police, who have on the previous 2 occasions that she's gone to them with concerns about murder, have ignored her, and they do so again. They're like, oh, you must be making it up. You're just seeing things where there's nothing. And there's this part where she's talking to the police, and she said, you've ignored me, and I've been right, and then you ignored me again, and I was right again, and I'm right about this, but you're still going to ignore me. That's the path you're choosing, and it's wrong, and this is why women don't report their stalkers, because you do nothing about it. And the police are like, but, you know, whatever. You're just a teenage girl, so you must be hysterical. And she's like, okay. So, of course, when she is stalked and kidnapped, it's up to her to, you know, not die. So, wild ride. Would recommend. Then I read Bodies of Water by V.H. Leslie. This was a historical fiction book that Jean from Jean's Bookish Thoughts recommended. So I thought, since it was pretty short and the ebook is on Scribd, I would go ahead and read it. I thought it was pretty good. It's not like hugely memorable, but it was well written and I did enjoy it. It's a novella about a woman who gets put into treatment in the Victorian age in this hospital that is all about hydrotherapy. And so there's some of it from her perspective, and then there's another perspective sort of in the present time with someone who has moved into the same building where this hydrotherapy center used to be, because it's now been changed into flats, and she feels like maybe it's a little bit haunted, and she gets weird vibes from it, so she decides to research the history of the building. Then I read 5 Little Pigs by Agatha Christie, and it was good. It was solid. It's an Agatha Christie, so you can't really go far wrong. This one is about Poirot is investigating a murder that took place, I think, 10-ish years ago, and someone was convicted for this murder, and her daughter, who's now grown up, thinks that her mother is for sure innocent, and so she asked Poirot to find the truth, and he does. And then I read If Cats Disappeared from the World by Genki Kawamura, and I really loved this book. The cats in it were such good boys and girls. I loved them so much. And it was a really like thought-provoking little novella. There's not much physical content, but the brain content, story content was really, really good and deep. And so a man with a terminal illness meets the devil, who he decides to nickname Aloha because he wears Hawaiian shirts, which I thought was really funny. And the devil says, I will make a deal with you. I will exchange one extra day of your life for you for making something in the world disappear. And so it takes place over a week, and things start disappearing, and the main character sort of thinks about like what his life was with these things and what his life is like now that these things have disappeared, and if it's better or worse or whatever. And eventually the devil picks cats to disappear, and so the main character has to, you know, think hard if making cats disappear is worth an extra day of life, because he is a cat person. He has a cat named Cabbage. Cabbage is such a good boy. And he also thinks about his childhood and the cats he encountered in his childhood, including his childhood cat named Lettuce, because he found her in a grocery box that said lettuce on it. So he was like, this cat is named Lettuce. Oh, my heart. Lettuce was such a good cat. Cabbage is such a good cat. I really enjoyed this. So this was my book club read, and this year we are reading books with cats in them. And this was definitely a hit. So next on my list is Killman Creek by Rachel Kane. This is part of a series, so I'm going to start with I'm just going to put the whole series in this little bit. So it's the Stillhouse Lake series. So a woman finds out that her husband, who seems perfect on the surface, is actually a serial killer who skins women. So disturbing, very much so. So after he goes to prison, she takes her kids and is on the run, essentially, because even though she and, of course, her kids had nothing to do with this, they didn't know that their family patriarch was a serial killer or that anything was wrong with him at all. Online mobs are forming and sending them lots of hate mail and like doxing them, and so it's really toxic. And so of course she doesn't want her kids to grow up with all of that. This is very like unhealthy and scary. And so she finally finds this place in Stillhouse Lake that she thinks is safe, like a safe place. And she's like, great, we can like put down roots now, because this place is so out of the way that no one will find us here. And then girls start to appear in the lake with missing skin. And she's like, oh no, I thought my husband was in lockup. But what is this? Is this a copycat crime? And then people start thinking that she is maybe the murderer. And so it's very dramatic. It's a very thrilling thriller. And it was so good that I immediately listened to the audiobooks for the next two books. I think I read them this year. So one of them is Killman Creek. That's the second book in the series. It's been long enough now that I can't remember if I read the other two books in this series in October or September. I think I just read the first two in September and then the other two in October. So I will talk about them in my October wrap up, which won't be far removed from now because October is almost over. Then I read Mrs. England by Stacey Halls and absolutely loved it. I did recently read Stacey Hall's other two books, The Familiars and The Foundling, and loved them as well. I think The Familiars is my favorite, then Mrs. England, then The Foundling. So Mrs. England is about a woman who has a tragic backstory, which we find out in bits and bobs as we go through this. And she is a trained children's nurse. So she takes a position with the England family, which has 4 children. And Mr. England is seems like a very normal guy, but Mrs. England seems very withdrawn. She doesn't talk to her kids a lot. And so Ruby, the main character, thinks it's a little weird, but as she enmeshes herself more into this family, she finds out more about their past, their personalities as well, and then we get to figure out more about her past, and then it comes to a very dramatic conclusion. And it was perfect, foreboding, creepy vibes for spooky season, or at least like the soft opening to spooky season, which is September. And yeah, it was great. I loved it, and you probably will too if you like historical fiction. This is set in 1904. Then I read My Cat Yugoslavia by Pajtim Stadovci. It's a Albanian name. I'm not sure if I'm saying that correctly, but this is another book that I read for a book club, not my cat book club, even though this also has a talking cat in it, for a different book club. And I enjoyed it. I didn't love it, but it was pretty solid. It's a refugee narrative with a talking cat in it. So the main character flees Kosovo when he's young, goes to Finland, and the author also has this same like part of his story. Like he also fled to Finland as a refugee, and so this book was actually originally written in Finnish, and I think this is the first book that has been translated in Finnish that I've read. Pretty sure. So that was an interesting departure from my norm, and I really enjoyed that. And so it does have like some magical realism aspects of it, like the talking cat. I like immediately when I read this, I was like, oh, it's like Behemoth and Master and Margarita. Like it was very much that same kind of cat. And interestingly, then when I was done and talked about it with my book club and read reviews of it, everyone also compares it to the Master and Margarita. Like everyone sees like this parallel, like, oh, it's Behemoth, but just in Finland. And I wish that the author had really committed more to this magical realism, because there's like bits and bobs, there's a talking cat, but I really like that aspect, and I wish that it had been more present throughout, because I was reading this, got to the talking cat, I was like, oh yeah, magical realism, and then the rest of it was just like realism. And I was like, was the talking cat a fever dream? Am I making this up? What's happening? So yeah, I wish he really like committed to the magical realism. And I think this is his first book as well, so I would like to read any other books that he comes out with in the future. I really liked the writing style. So yeah, underhyped, I think. I hadn't heard of this book before my book club recommended it. So underhyped, would recommend. And then another Agatha Christie, I read Sad Cypress, which is another Poirot working backwards murder mystery. So it's like a murder that's happened in the past. Someone hasn't been convicted, but she's pretty much almost convicted. Like all the evidence is like she did it. And she's like, I didn't do it though, but I don't really have evidence for that. Please believe me. And Poirot was like, it kind of looks like you did it. And she was like, okay, I mean, I know it looks bad, but just poke around. And he's like, okay, I will. And then he solves the murder mystery, and it's also suitably dramatic and has a satisfying ending. Though I would say, I listened to the audiobook of this and I was like, oh yeah, going along. And then there's like casual little like injections of like anti-Semitism, and I was like, ugh. So I mean, it's Agatha Christie. I'm not surprised, but yeah, I didn't like that. And then I read The Island of Missing Trees by Edith Shafak, and Edith Shafak is like proving again and again with every book she comes out with why she is my favorite author. This was great. I loved it. I rated this 5 stars. I mean, I don't think I've rated any Edith Shafak book less than 5 stars, but this is like, if I could go higher than 5 stars with this, I would. But I can't. Oh well. So yeah, this is about Ada. She's a teenager living in London, and her parents are both from Cyprus, but her dad is Greek Cypriot and her mother is Turkish Cypriot. So at the beginning of this story, her mother is recently deceased, and so she's having normal teenage struggles plus the added struggle of being recently half orphan. So she misses her mom. She has complicated feelings about her mom, and she of course loves her dad. Her dad loves her, but like they're very different people. And so like he's a kind of like weird introvert academic who likes trees. Island of Missing Trees. Yeah. And so she's an only child, but she does have a sort of sibling in the form of a fig tree. They're the same age. because when her parents left Cyprus, her mom was pregnant with her, and her dad took a cutting off a tree that they both love, a fig tree, in a taverna, and brought it with them because they were afraid that the original tree would get ill and die. So that original tree is centuries old, has a lot of history, and so the cutting is both old and new, and so Ada has this like weird shadow self tree sibling. So we see her perspective, and we also have the perspective in the past of her parents trying to carry on a healthy relationship while being sort of forcibly separated by civil war. So that storyline is like a bit of a bummer, but we do know that they make it. They come to London, they survive, and end up being together. And all of this is complicated by Ada's mom's sister coming to visit. So again, Ada and her aunt are very different people, and because they've never met before, they have like a bit of a contentious relationship, but they grow into it. And like the writing style is great. All the descriptions, all the imagery are great, as per all of Elif Shafak's writing. And yeah, the explorations of identity and stuff is also really good. Identity and stuff. That's what Elif Shafak writes about best, I think. Identity and stuff. I am a literary professional. Then I read The Ocean at the End of the Lane by Neil Gaiman. Again, great writing, great descriptions. Neil Gaiman's imagination is so wonderful. I am always taken aback. My breath is taken away at his like imagination, his like storytelling, and his writing style. And this was an audiobook. Neil Gaiman reads his own works, and he has a really, really nice voice. At least he reads most of them. So this was great. I loved it so much. So this was, again, like a very short, but it felt like it had a lot of content in it, much like If Cats Disappeared from the World. Short, but punchy. So the main character goes to his old home that he grew up in for a funeral, and he decides to visit the next door farm where he used to play with his childhood friend, and visits their family. And while he's there, he starts remembering the weird adventures that he and his childhood friends had, and they are sort of increasingly dramatic and scary, and they have to band together to battle not exactly demons, but like demon adjacent beings that are out to destroy everything. And it's a really like great story about, you know, kids having adventures and like childhood friendships. And I would absolutely read this again in future. I really enjoyed it. Then I read The Sisters Grimm by Menna van Praag, and I have pretty much already forgotten most of the content of this book. I thought it was extremely okay, which is sad because I was really looking forward to reading this. It was on my to-read list for a while. My friend recommended it to me, and we tend to have like very overlapping tastes in books. She's the one that recommended Mrs. England to me, so clearly a hit there, but a miss here. Well, not exactly a miss, like it wasn't bad. So this is about 4 half-sisters that don't know each other exist, and like their dad is a sorcerer being, and they're being prepared for something that happens on their 18th birthday. So it's sort of like a countdown situation, and all of these 4 sisters are very different, and eventually they do meet and form relationships with each other. And in that way, it's kind of like The Once and Future Witches, which is a book that I really enjoyed. It was great. This one, I didn't like the writing style as much. I didn't really connect with the characters. The only character I really connected with was Liana. She was my favorite. She had, in my opinion, the best story arc. And yeah, that's pretty much all I can say about that. Like, it was pretty forgettable. And I hope that if you read it, you like it better than I did. And then another Agatha Christie, I read Third Girl, and this one is about Ariadne Oliver, who I think is my favorite Poirot sidekick. She lives in this building, and she at some point goes to a party in the building hosted by these 3 like young professional women. And then one of them goes missing, and she has the smallest room. Like, she's the third girl in this flat. And she asks Poirot to investigate because she's like, there's something weird here. Like, the rest of the girls in this flat like seem really normal, but like something's off. I can just feel it in my intuition, which is something that Ariadne Oliver is very into, her intuition. So Poirot investigates, and indeed there is something fishy about it, and Poirot finds out what it is. And then another Agatha Christie. I was clearly on an Agatha Christie bender last month. And this one is Towards Zero, and this one is I think it's a Miss Marple. It's already been so long I can't remember, but this one is a country estate in Cornwall. People go there for like a little holiday with this one dude's great aunt, and this dude's great aunt is still on good terms with this dude's ex-wife Audrey. So they're there at the same time, and this dude has a new wife, Kay, and she brings her friend who's like kind of in love with her. And then of course, like the neighbors next door are also there. And then the great aunt dies. She's very clearly violently murdered. And so everyone's like, oh, well, clearly it was the ex-wife. And the ex-wife is like, but why would I do that? And everyone's like, well, everyone knows that you're actually a crazy murderess. And she's like, I know. And so Miss Marple comes in, sorts everything out, finds out who did it, as per usual. And then this was a book that I wanted to read in October, but I got impatient, so I read it in September, and that is We Have Always Lived in the Castle by Shirley Jackson. I really enjoy Shirley Jackson's short stories, which, like, we know I'm not really into short stories that much, but Shirley Jackson's short stories are great. The first one I read by her is The Lottery, which is pretty famous and really dark. So of course I was super excited to read We Have Always Lived in the Castle because it's longer fiction and also super dark. So this is a novella. It's not very long. I read the audiobook, which was also really well done, really well read, and I really like the narrator's voice. I can't remember who it is now, but yeah, it was suitably spooky and creepy. I read it on my walks. I usually like to go walking in the cemetery that's near my house, as I'm sure you know. And it was the perfect companion for these walks. And it didn't take me very long. I think it took me 2 walks to finish this. So yeah, a classic. Would recommend. It's about Mary Catherine, who's I think she's 18. She lives with her sister and her grandfather, I think it's uncle, in this house that's kind of moldering around them. And all the village people are really wary of them. They think that because the rest of the family died suddenly and mysteriously not long ago, that everyone who lives in the house now is a serial killer. So we see all of this from her perspective. A distant relative shows up and is like, okay, let's talk about finances, what we're going to do with the house, why is everyone afraid of you, and things get creepy and spooky from there. And last, I read Witchmark by C.L. Polk. This is the first in a trilogy, and I am really excited to get to the rest of the books in them. Rest of the books in this trilogy. Rest of the books in it. Grammar, I can do it. And I really enjoyed this. My pen pal recommended this to me. And as soon as I saw a magical Edwardian era-esque fantasy world, I was like, yeah, I would like that. So, package delivery. Probably more books, knowing me. Anyway. Right. So in this magical Edwardian-esque world, a World War I analog has just happened, and the main character is a magician, but he can't let the rest of the world know that he is magical. He's also fleeing his magical, powerful family, and so he is healing people that were wounded in the war, and then his sister shows up and things get complicated. So I really loved the writing style. This was again an audiobook. I liked the way the audiobook was done. I think if I were to reread this trilogy, I would either get an ebook copy or a print copy of these books. But yeah, it was really solid. I really enjoyed it and will absolutely be continuing. This was kind of in the same comforting fantasy vibes that I did my like pumpkin spice comforting fantasy video on recently. So I was really happy that I found another book series with this vibe, because it is one of my favorite sort of subgenre vibes. So time for stats. I read 16 books in total, a total of 4,912 pages, almost 5,000, but not quite. And the average rating was 82.5%. So a pretty solid reading month. I am hoping that October is going to keep up that high quality reading. I think it will, but you'll have to wait. I mean, not long, because October is basically over already. But thank you for watching. Like and subscribe, and I will see you in my next video. Bye guys.